John McTernan is a former Labour political strategist and joins us live from Westminster and thinks UKIP will never win the real Labour heartland. And also in central London, Harry Cole, a contributing editor at The Spectator. He says UKIP's success means it can't really get much worse for Ed Miliband right now. Gentlemen, good afternoon to both of you. John, let's start with you. You feel that the heartlands are invulnerable to the predations of UKIP, but what about Rotherham?
Well, the point about Rotherham is that Rotherham will only always be a Labour seat. UKIP have taken over as the challenger party in Rotherham, but they will come second in the general election. The UKIP attraction in the end for Labour voters is ultimately to older, white, working class men, but they don't have enough votes anywhere in our heartland to take a seat. The difference is, looking at Castlepoint, they've now got the basis for challenging a Tory seat. So the difference between UKIP's impact on Labour and the Tories, yes, Labour are losing votes to UKIP and can't be complacent about it, but our seats are not becoming target seats. Tory seats are increasingly in the crosshairs of UKIP, and that should be worrying for David Cameron.
Yeah, Harry Cole, what do you make of that? That particular point that in Essex, where UKIP have made such spectacular gains today, they represent a genuine threat to the Tories, whereas actually what's happened in Rotherham is not something which will represent a true threat for the Labour leadership in its heartlands.
I disagree, and I have to say that John's in a bit of denial there. If you look at the popular vote in Rotherham last night, UKIP got more votes. They beat Labour on the popular vote in Rotherham. They may not have taken control of the council, but they got more votes than Labour, and that's something that's going to be constantly repeated. I've often said that instead of just focusing on UKIP being a party of the south and winning in places like Essex and maybe in the southwest, in fact, they're going to do very well in the areas where the Labour vote is soft, places where it's been taken for granted, where it's presumed that they're going to weigh the Labour vote rather than have to count it. That's where UKIP are making the most traction, and I think that John's in a state of denial if he thinks that if they're not a force to be contended with in places like Hull, Hartlepool and Rotherham last night.
John McTernan, when we see those pictures, we've been playing them for the last hour or so, but they do bear repeating because they tell us something from Thurrock as Nigel Farage arrived there. They tell us something about that euphoria that his supporters are enjoying. Understandable, any party that has a good night is likely to see its supporters heaping some adulation on the shoulders of a successful leader, but there is that authenticity that continues to come across and that voters recognise.
Oh, look, yeah, this is a good day for UKIP, but they're still a very small party in terms of council seats held. And they are a threat to the Tory party. But the bigger problem for the Tories at the moment is the numbers of councils in London which are flipping over to Labour. You're starting to see the suburbs of London, which have been Boris Johnson's base, turn red. You've got Redbridge, first time ever Labour. You've got Croydon, Merton going back. You've got other councils coming out this afternoon. All will be bad results. And in the end, the election is going to be determined in the big cities, not determined in seats like Castlepoint or the small councils like Brentwood. But, you know, Brentwood should be a worry for the Tories. That should be a solid Tory area, and it's drifting away from them. So something is going on. There is a fragmentation of voting, but in the key seats, the areas where the battleground seats of the next general election, the marginal seats, you go across the country, Labour are winning in those areas. Amber Valley just declared for Labour, a key seat they've got to win. Cambridge declared for Labour. That's a key seat Labour have to win. So matched against the seats you have to win, they're doing all right.
Harry Cole, address that London question which John McTernan raises.
Just look at the numbers. 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago, Labour was saying they were expecting to win 300 council seats, an additional 300 council seats, even up to 500 I heard talk of. Look at those numbers. It's not possible for them to do that. This has been an interesting night for the Tories, a bad night for the Tories as well, but what should not be allowed to be distracted from is the fact this is a terrible night for Labour. They are the official opposition, but they are not picking up the opposition votes from the government. People are angry with the Conservative Party, but they are not moving towards Labour, which is a fatal sign. I was speaking to a Labour source this morning who said the worst thing that Labour could do right now is what John is doing, and that's putting his head in the sand and denying that there are huge problems for Labour, and they just don't have the numbers there. Their campaign was absolute chaos. What was it about? Was it about attacking the Lib Dems, as their crazy attack ad with a giant cat eating Nick Clegg proved, or was it about the cost of living, where their own leader didn't even know how much he spent on shopping? The opposition are in chaos, and these are results reflecting that. The UKIP are becoming the official opposition because Labour are failing.
We'll come to some of those campaigning gaffes or otherwise in just a second, but Harry Cole, just address that question of London for us, because in an election, the results of which are quite equivocal in many different ways and patchy, you can point to London,
yes,
notwithstanding what happened in Kingston, and say, actually, that was a good night for Labour in London.
Yeah,
and it's been suggested, well, the reason for that is the young and educated don't like the look of UKIP.
Well, I think that's a pretty patronising way of looking at things. I know a lot of young, educated people who do like UKIP. But I think London is traditionally, it's a safe Labour stronghold. It shouldn't be a surprise that Labour do well in London. It's a Labour seat. Because of the way Boris Johnson won the last two mayoral elections, it's always become sort of a split vote. But Labour traditionally is a London city. If they can't win in London, where can they win? Because they're certainly not winning in places like Swindon and in other places in the south east where they should be picking up votes.
John McTernan, address that question of Ed Miliband's performance this last week in particular. I mean, the media occasionally get hold of a storyline, a narrative, and that they'll make it fit the prevailing facts regardless of which way they're blowing. But when you see, for instance, images the likes of which we saw this week, not necessarily quite what the spin doctors were looking for, when you get a party which is predicating a lot of its campaign on the cost of living, and then you get a leader who doesn't quite know what the cost of living is, you get people like Graham Stringer, veteran Labour backbencher, saying, come on, guys, get your presentational act together.
Graham Stringer is a moaner, traditional moaner on the backbenches. He moaned when we were winning. He moaned with Blair, he moaned with Brown, he's moaning with Ed. No surprises there. There's always going to be voices of people who just, the awkward squad. In terms of the campaign, Ed Miliband fought the first election campaign for Europe for years. It's actually been about policies on rent, policies on housing, policies on prices.
Policy on Europe? Policy on Europe?
The policy on Europe is actually very straightforward and very attractive. The policy on Europe is we're not going to hold a referendum, and that's actually the best news. The best news for British business is to have the certainty that a Labour government would not have an in-out referendum on Europe, because that is not what the country needs. It needs stability in a relationship with Europe so we can actually benefit from the growth that's coming. That's the problem for the Tories, is they were in the centre ground, and Boris Johnson won in London because Boris is for immigration and he celebrates diversity. The Tories are losing here because their government, Cameron, Osborne, Theresa May, the whole mob of them, they actually are trying to strangle immigration, and they don't celebrate diversity. That goes against the trend in London. It's not simply that people in London are younger or better educated or whatever. They're actually, it's a more diverse electorate.
Harry was bursting to come in. We'll give him the last word, Harry.
I just think that Labour have got a decision to make now. They've got to work out who they're actually fighting, what they're actually fighting for, and they've got to have a look at their internal structure. Just on a process level, in the last 24 hours, the Tory machine's been pushing their lines. The UKIP have been pushing their lines. Silence almost from Labour. Where are they?
Harry Cole, John McTernan, thanks both very much indeed.